same. It's a lot of mana acceleration, several copies of Nykthos, enabling things like Genesis Hydra, Pelucranos, cards we've seen before, and 4 copies of Whisperwood Elemental, which has been very impressive on camera so far this weekend.
It's all about acceleration, acceleration, acceleration in this matchup. The first one to do broken things is typically the one to win, which means that Grace starting off with an Elvish Mystic is very important. He's got a Temple of Abandon for land at number 2. He will scry here, and we'll see where the top card is going to go. But both these players are able to put together some very, very impressive things if they have Nykthos, if they have a lot of mana. I think Berni's deck may be the better of the two at accomplishing these impressive things just because he does have 4 Nykthoses, he does have more mana acceleration, but Grace has a card that Berni doesn't bring to the table in Shaman of the Great Hunt.
Yeah, so these are, again, the core of these decks very much the same. They are very light on interaction as well. So this is going to be a race to something big, at least game 1, where these decks are not interfering with each other. And right now, Tannon has a considerable edge in that regard.
Crater's Claws takes care of Elvish Mystic. You see Grace play another copy of Temple of Abandon and Scry, get in with his mana accelerants. Berni does finally draw a second land to play Sylvan Caryatid. Shaman of the Great Hunt, the draw here for Grace, and he's coming in with everybody, so some creatures are going to get some counters here in just a moment. It could be a runaway here very quickly in game number 1.
Yeah, at this point, Robert needs to accelerate very quickly into a substantial play. He has very little time to do so. I almost feel like it has to be land and Pelucranos this turn just to be able to block.
Well, there's the land. Let's see if he does have the Pelucranos.
Crater's Claws as well. We get the Shaman off the table.
Oh, that's what it looks like it's going to be. There's the Claws, takes care of that. Now he has to hope that Grace doesn't really have any action afterward, which, to be fair, these Green Devotion decks, they're really at the mercy of their draw step.
Absolutely. You see Tannon's hand at this point, just an Elvish Mystic and 2 lands. Now 1 land with the Temple having been played.
And top card goes to the bottom.
And Tannon just has to patiently wait now for some big play, whether it be Crater's Claws, one of his 4+ mana threats.
There's your Elvish Mystic, there's a passing of the turn. Berni's got to be thrilled how that turn went.
Yep, I mean, it's an indicator that Tannon is on empty. The best case scenario for Tannon's hand right now is Crater's Claws. Most likely scenario is just another land.
Berni has some more acceleration there, and Sylvan Caryatid and Voyaging Satyr, passing the turn back over to Grace. Grace will take a draw step. It's a rather important one. He found a copy of Nissa, it seems. That's not bad at all.
This is not shabby. That's another point of distinction between Tannon's list and Robert's list. Tannon with 2 copies of Nissa in the main. Robert relegating all of them to the sideboard.
A force to become a 4/4 Trampler. Coming into the red zone along with the Radical Mystic and the 2/2 Elvish Mystic. This is a lethal attack, so Berni's got some blocking to do.
And the question is if he's willing to trade with the Voyaging Satyr. It appears that he is.
So Voyaging Satyr and Radical Mystic will trade. Sylvan Caryatid gets in front of Elvish Mystic. 4/4 gets through. Ugin the draw step here for Berni. There's Whisperwood Elemental. This will allow him to manifest. And a passing of the turn. We'll see if Whisperwood can keep him in this thing. Grace going to sacrifice a Wooded Foothills on the upkeep. Thin his deck out a little bit and hope for a good draw step.
Though I'm not sure there's much value to thinning out at that stage because Tannon does have an Elvish Mystic. He's scored to the bottom. There's some value in keeping a Wooded Foothills in play because of Courser of Crufix and having a little more information on what your draw step is going to be. These are all very slim percentages in either direction.
Grace will take a draw step. It's a land. Up goes Nissa, another 4/4 incoming.
You should have a waiver form. If you all could please flip your deck list over to the back, make sure that waiver form is filled out for me.
Now Grace has to decide how he wants to attack.
I would like to remind you of our buying
Well,
and
both
selling
the
policy.
forests need to be blocked with Robert at 4.
While you're welcome
Yes.
to buy
But
and
Robert
sell
can
with
afford to
one
allow
another,
everything else to come
you are
through
not
on the
welcome
board
to
at
buy and
least.
sell with one another.
The big question for Berni is how is he going to stop this
If you'd
Nissa?
like to buy and sell cards, we have 2 sales booths. We have our
He needs to
StarCityGames.com sales
flood a lot of
booth
stuff on the
located
board.
in the
Crater's
room.
Claws is a way to get it off the table.
Strike zone with us today.
Here's the red
Once
zone.
again, they'd be happy to
Mystics
buy
are going to
and
hang
sell
back
you
on defense.
magic goods and accessories.
Makes for an interesting blocking situation, I think.
Last quick thing
I think Whisperwood's going to jump in front of one of these 4/4s just to trade. And of course he has to block the other one. The question is, do you want to do it with a manifest creature or do you want to do it with Sylvan Caryatid? And that's what Berni's thinking about.
Exactly, and a lot of that just depends on what's left over in his hand. How important is that mana? Because the 2/2 in play does a little bit more work holding off the Elvish Mystics that are currently play, and in conjunction with another creature with some power, can do some work against future forests as well.
Hello players, and again, welcome and thank you for joining us today on our Legacy Premier IQ.
Now, there are your blocks. 1 trample damage will occur. Berni's going to go down to 3. Also makes you wonder what that manifest creature is if he's not willing to block with that.
Could be a mystery.
Especially because in the situation there, he could have double blocked, make sure that no trample damage happened, but it seems as though it's important for him to keep that alive. Here's a lot of blossoms.
Or if you let a judge or a staff member know that you need a restroom break, take a phone call, whatever you need to get done.
Grace will sacrifice his Wooded Foothills yet again. Get a land out of his deck. Go down to 18 in the process.
And if you have any questions on card interaction,
and Berni will sit tight here. We'll see what he's able to do.
Raise your hand and call for a judge. A gentleman in blue will help you out. If you do not agree with his ruling, you are welcome to appeal.
But Nissa is not typically good in these matchups just because 4/4s get outclassed so easily on the ground. But this is one of the spots where it does a lot of work.
At this time, I will ask you to take 1 minute to review your deck list. This is your last chance to make sure you are in the clear of any issue. You should have a minimum of 60
Grace has drawn his card. He's ticked up his Nissa.
in your main deck.
Another 4/4 here.
0 to 15 copies of a card in your sideboard. And no more
He's coming in with everybody this time. 2 4/4 Tramplers and a 2/2 Elvish Mystic.
Rats and the like. So again, I'll give you 1 minute to review your deck list for legality.
You can get the vibe that Robert's trying to hold on as much as he can. That he's got big stuff in his hand that could turn this game around, but he might just get squeaked out on damage before he has time to deploy it all.
Yeah, one card he has in his hand is Ugin. Now, oddly enough, Ugin doesn't line up very well in this particular board state because he can't kill the lands from Nissa. That's a big problem, but that is obviously a huge payoff card from this matchup, and I wouldn't be surprised if the first player Nissa wins a high percentage of the time. I don't think that Berni's ever going to ever be able to get there, and even if he does, I don't think he'd win the game.
Yep.
So oddly enough, Ugin, I don't think would be good enough in this situation. Berni's going to lose his entire board, and at this point, as he does take care of a 4/4, I don't think there's any coming back.
And now he's going to 2. This Corsair represents a second lethal creature.
Land off the top of the deck, and Windswept Teeth, Nykthos on top of the deck now for Grace. Berni will take a draw step. It's a copy of Eidolon of Blossoms. He'll deploy a Corsair. Take a look at the top card. It's a Voyaging Satyr, and we're going to move on to the second game. Tannon and Grace are going to win game number 1 here over Robert Berni. The Green-Red Devotion Mirror, game number 1 goes to Grace. And we'll move on to the sideboards here, where we will start with Robert Berni. He's the Grand Prix Phoenix champion, does have 3 Nissa World Wakers in his board, 3 Nylea's Disciple, 2 Reclamation Sage, 2 copies of Cetessan Tactics, 2 Arbor Colossus, a Xenagos God of Revels, and 2 copies of Genesis Hydra. He's already got 2 of those in the main deck, so he can move up to 4 if he'd like.
I think you're going to see the Planeswalkers come in. I think the additional copies of Genesis Hydra. I think Arbor Colossus is excellent in this matchup, as is Cetessan Tactics. Robert's got a lot to bring in. Really, only the Nylea's Disciples and the Reclamation Sages have little place in the matchup.
On the other side of things here for Grace, what do we see?
2 copies of Arc Lightning, 2 copies of Wild Slash, 2 copies of Nylea's Disciple, 2 Reclamation Sage, a Cetessan Tactics, and Arbor Colossus, 3 copies of Briber's Purse, 2 copies of Outpost Siege. I think you're going to probably see the Cetessan Tactics and the Arbor Colossus come in here, same as it will on Robert's side. The red removal can be nice and breaking up Robert's early mana acceleration, so you might see the Wild Slashes and Arc Lightnings come in as well. And the matchup may be slow enough for Outpost Siege to be a player. Another source of card advantage, but also these decks can do some pretty explosive things with the mana, and a card like that can be pretty slow. So Tannon may be on the fence on that.
Well, these players will shuffle up in sideboard here for game number 2. It'll be underway in just a moment, but if you missed the announcement yesterday, as far as Season 3 and Season 4 are concerned on the Open Series, we did unveil that yesterday. So we will talk about Season 3 here, where things kick off with the Modern Grand Prix in Charlotte.
We expect this one to have huge attendance, given what our history is running Modern Grand Prix and running Grand Prix in Charlotte. June 12th through 14th, this is going to be after Miami, but before London, so you can expect more information to be rolling in around that time. We're very excited about this one.
We'll go to Indianapolis after that, the 20th and the 21st, for a standard Open Series event. Standard Open Series in Baltimore as well, the 27th and the 28th. And then for the first time ever, July 18th and the 19th, Chicago.
Yep, we get to check off 2 first evers for Open Series destinations in 2015, this weekend in Houston, and then July 18th and 19th in Chicago.
We'll go to Richmond after that, July 25th and the 26th, the Modern Open Series in Washington, D.C., the 8th and the 9th. And then the big one, as far as Season 3 is concerned, I know it's not an Open Series event, but it's still a pretty large one, especially for you and I. We're going to London.
Yep, our first time hosting a Grand Prix overseas. We're extremely excited about this event. August 14th through 16th. We're going to be a ways away from providing more information other than that it's standard. It's occurring in London, and we're running it, but that show's going to be incredible.
Legacy Open Series in Charlotte the 22nd and the 23rd after London. And then We'll do an invitational in New Jersey. Standard Legacy with a Standard Open Series. Myself, you, and Matthias Hunt.
We always hold it down in New Jersey. Great attendance. We've had a ton of awesome invitationals there. We have another Open coming later in the year, which we'll get to momentarily, and we're always happy to go back to New Jersey. At least I'm always happy to go back to New Jersey.
I am not going to share my opinions this morning about going back. So, though I think you know what they are.
I do.
You guys have some mean diners out there.
We do. We do.
So I will give you, I was going to say I'm a fan of diners, but really, who isn't a fan of diners?
They're open 24 hours, typically. There's a lot of them. It's a very competitive market, so prices are good. Quality's high.
I
It's an icon.
I can't imagine someone just saying, you know what, I don't like diners.
Right. No one says that.
I hate these things. Why, is the French toast too good?
No.
Is that the problem?
Near the only game in town, we had a diner we go to all the time called the Time to Eat Diner.
Nice
An
name.
icon.
Really nice name.
Yep. Well, the icon, the logo of the place is a clock that's kind of dancing around with arms and legs and a face.
That's just good marketing.
It's time to eat.
Yeah, I get it.
Yep.
Thank you. I get it. It certainly is. Time to eat.
Time to eat.
What was your weapon of choice?
Went with the omelet a lot.
Okay.
Went with the eggs and bacon a fair bit. Sometimes you would just sit there and drink coffee, read the newspaper, maybe play some games of Magic. You know, this is all very typical Jersey stuff.
I had you pegged for a moons over my hammy kind of guy.
No, too fancy.
Yeah.
Get my copy of the Star Ledger, just sit there and enjoy myself, you know?
Doing this from like the age of 12.
Right.
Yeah. Just dialing up the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. Simpler times.
An old soul.
Yep.
Now, do you read all the newspaper when you were young or just the sports section?
When I was a kid, I would just read the sports section.
There you go.
Pretty much.
There you go.
By the time I was 14 or 15, I was reading other stuff. But early on, just the sports section.
The Ohio newspaper, or at least the Clue newspaper, is called the Plain Dealer.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was a big sports section guy in the morning before school. Got to get those West Coast box scores.
Right, yeah, because you
big.
couldn't stay up late enough to watch it.
I couldn't.
Exactly.
Welcome to shuffle your decks. Introduce yourself to your opponents. Resolve your opening hands.
Dad wouldn't let you do that.
Just yet. We're resolving the last few issues.
Take a mulligan here, Will Grace. Just the idea that you had to, the next morning, to get the West Coast box scores, thinking of that now is completely ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of born and raised in a very special time where we got to be kind of conscious of the pre-internet days and then integrate the internet into our lives.
Yes.
And I think that's actually kind of a fascinating time in world history to have been alive.
At this point, I can't imagine functioning without the internet.
Right. Have you ever had the scenario where one of your friends is without their phone, maybe it died or they lost it or something, and you are trying to coordinate meetings somewhere and they are not there at the time that you expected, and there's this apprehension of, what are we supposed to do now? Do we just wait indefinitely? Do we abandon this person potentially? Back in the day, that just happened all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. You just would go somewhere and you say, I'll meet you here at this time.
And they weren't there. You don't even know what to do.
Yeah, you just would sit there for a little while and hopefully they would show up, and then that's that.
Right.
I like the panic when your phone is on like 5%.
Yep.
How is someone going to find me?
How is they going to find me? And it's particularly interesting when it comes to Magic, because I played Magic at a time where I would go to the store and play against people. If I would go to a new store, they would play cards I had literally never seen before in my entire life.
Yeah.
Like, I had no idea this card even existed. And now, that's not a thing anymore.
Those were the days.
Yep. Except if something came out of a Commander product, then I do get to still have that
I
experience.
got to get a little look. Yeah.
I had no idea this existed.
Number 1, you have 50 minutes. You may begin.
Will of the Council, huh?
The first time that someone played the From the Vault Dryad Arbor against me, I had that experience of, I didn't know this was a Dryad Arbor, I assumed it was a forest.
Sure.
But that's not quite the same thing as your opponent playing Stone Throwing Devils against you for the first time and being like, I had no idea this was even a card.
Grace going to take a mulligan down to 5 here. Berni's sitting pretty with 7 cards, so we'll see if Tannon's able to come back. I remember the first time my opponent played a Phyrexian Scuda against me. I just didn't know what that was, and I thought that card was unbeatable.
Did you just repulse it?
I was not smart enough to have repulsed it.
I would have just repulsed it.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, the era that I was playing, the sets that I just missed, my first set was Revised / The Dark. That was about the era that I came in.
Okay.
So the sets that I missed were Arabian Nights, Antiquities, and Legends. Those were the sets that predated me. And those sets have just some completely baffling, nonsensical cards. So getting to be introduced to those cards for the first time is particularly interesting. Because often you would read them and still not know what they really did.
Yeah.
One of the first prizes I won for a tournament was a Pyramids. Copy of Pyramids. Which is it's an ostensibly anti-land destruction card that costs 6 mana to get into play.
Oh, I have the artwork in my head right now.
And I had never seen this card before, so even though I read it, and even, 16-year-old me was like, I think this is pretty bad, it was still exciting to win something I had never seen before.
The first big rare I ever had was Grinning Totem.
Ooh. Yep.
I
Nice.
found out in Inquest it was worth $20.
Yep.
You'd have to kill me to trade for that card.
Yep.
This is not for trade. This is not for sale. Go away. That was my first big one. A Temple of Abandon to start things off here for Berni. Grace with a windswept teeth. He'll pass the turn back.
Now, a mulligan to 5 doesn't necessarily doom Tannon in this matchup because these decks don't really interact very much. They do a little bit more post-board, but it is just about, can you accelerate into something big? And these decks can do it on 5 cards, assuming that their mana creatures aren't being killed. So Tannon is not out of this game just by being on 5 cards.
Yeah, not impossible, especially when he's on the draw, too.
Yep.
But we have seen with ramp strategies, and I would classify Green-Red Devotion as a ramp strategy, the more you mulligan with the decks, the harder it is to win.
For sure. I mean, it's the same is true of all Magic decks, but this is a matchup that's actually pretty tolerant of people mulliganing.
See Grace's hand. He does have a second land. He also has a copy of Arc Lightning there.
Sign-ups for today's modern 5K Premier IQ.
This is a Voyaging Satyr. We're going to go back Berni's way.
30 more minutes remaining to sign up for today's
Arc Lightning is interesting in this matchup and against this deck in general because it's really inefficient unless Elvish Mystic is in the equation, and then it's insane.
Yeah.
And I've seen this a couple times now where people have had Arc Lightning. Sometimes it's been great, and other times it's been just kind of mediocre.
Credit Clause will take care of Voyaging Satyr. Temple of Abandon here for Berni will allow him to scry. Top card's headed to the bottom of the deck, and he'll pass the turn back. Much like Drown in Sorrow against White Blue Heroic, as we saw yesterday. Sometimes an A+, sometimes an F- is Arc Lightning. It's a morph.
Ooh, probably Rattleclaw Mystic. Just confirming real quick.
Well, don't take the surprise away.
Yep.
It could be anything.
Well, that doesn't actually appear to be the case. I think it is just Rattleclaw Mystic.
But does Robert know that? Bum, bum, bum.
Occasionally, we've seen green ramp strategies that have touched SCGHOU Mauler,
Yes,
but
we
since Tannon is, a red-green deck, I would be really surprised if that was the case.
Eidolon Blossoms. That'll draw a card. Here's a Forest. There's an Elvish Mystic. Pass the turn back. Could be an explosive turn, all kidding aside here with the Rattleclaw Mystic and the Unmorph.
And now the board's pretty juicy for Arc Lightning,
Yeah, no, it's fine.
so I think you might see it this turn.
Mana Confluence in hand. Also has red mana available thanks to Rattleclaw Mystic once he does unmorph it, if he chooses to this turn. And he will. So a little burst of mana. There's Arc Lightning. Now a Voyaging Satyr, a land, and a passing of the turn. Grace's last card is a copy of Whisperwood Elemental. Berni gonna draw. Courser Crufix. Take a look at the top card. It's a Forest. Forest coming into play. Trigger, gain a life up to 20. Nykthos on top now.
But you can see Tannon's functioning just fine on 5 cards. The last card in hand is a payoff card.
Yep.
He's got Nykthos in play, which means he's drawing very live off the top of his deck.
Into the tank Grace is going to go. See how much he can put together this turn. No great attacks to be had here. Danny going to play a Courser. Rattleclaw Mystic on top of the deck.
I mean, Tannon was really hoping to find a land here, as
Yeah.
I believe he is now short of the ability to cast Whisperwood Elemental.
He comes up a mana short now.
Because the Voyaging Satyr now has to just untap any other land to get the Nykthos going, and that only leaves him with 4 mana.
Yep. And all you can do is pass the turn, so we're going to go Berni's way. He'll draw Nykthos. Take a look at the top cards of Voyaging Satyr. The problem for Robert this turn is that it's been all acceleration, no payoff. So he's going to play a Wooded Foothills this turn. There's a Voyaging Satyr. The last card in his hand is Nykthos. Grace knows that. And so what Bernie's hoping for is that when he sacrifices this Wooded Foothills, that something is good on top of his deck.
Yep. And this is why Tannon Mulligan to 5 does not necessarily end the game. There's a couple things going on here. One is Robert's not interacting with the early mana creatures. And number 2 is Robert can't really interact with the payoff cards either, which means if Tannon has a hand that goes somewhere, he's going to get to play Magic. Sometimes you mulligan to 5 and you're playing against a deck with Hero's Downfall or Drown in Sorrow, and these things aren't necessarily the case.
Radical Mystic and Whisperwood Elemental are going to come in. Creator's Clause will be manifested. And Bernie's going to sacrifice his Wooded Foothills. He'll lose 1 and then gain 1 thanks to the Courser, so his life total will stay the same. Top card of Grace's deck is a Xenagos the Reveler. So we'll see that next turn from Grace. But for Bernie, it's time for a big draw. Now, he does have some huge ones in his deck, and I think we're both thinking of Ugin right now.
Ugin would be a really big one.
That's not bad.
No, I was going to say that one of the big problems here from this stage is Tannon between the Xenagos on top of his deck and the Whisperwood Elemental can really generate an endless sea of chump blockers, but Polukranos does break that up quite a bit.
And it's a Polukranos in combination with Nykthos and 2 Voyaging Satyrs. So now the fun part starts where, all right, how much damage can I deal? What do I want to kill?
The other thing to consider in all of this is there is a Whisperwood Elemental in play on Tannon's side, and if Robert goes ahead and fights too many small creatures, Tannon does have the option of just sacrificing the Whisperwood Elemental and generating a bunch of manifest tokens as a result.
Yep.
So it's a very complicated Polukranos activation, but it's very good for Robert that he found Polukranos, obviously, because that's one of his high-impact draws in this spot.
Whisperwood Elemental is delightful. It is a heck of a Magic card, and it has really, really been good this weekend. Now here is Polukranos. You have to imagine that Bernie wanted to play the Mountain off the top of his deck because he doesn't want to draw that card next turn. However, he needs Nykthos in play to generate a lot of mana and go crazy with Voyaging Satyr, so he'll just play and pass. Again, Xenagos will be the draw. Bernie does know that. He also knows the manifest creature in play for Grace. And we're in the draw step right now, but it looks like Bernie may let him pass through that. We'll see. Sees a forest on top of the deck and stopping in the draw step, of course, because he sees what Courser is revealing. But we're going to move on to the first main phase. So the land will come into play. Take a look at the top card now. It's a Elvish Mystic for Grace. Xenagos in hand. You see the board here of 2 Radical Mystics, a Voyaging Satyr, a Whisperwood Elemental. The Manifest is a Creator's Clause, and that Courser.
And I think that priority 1 is probably getting the Whisperwood Elemental off the table. Past that, he might try to pick apart a couple mana creatures.
There's Xenagos. Looks like it may be time to make a Satyr token. But how Bernie opts to use the Polukranos this game, at this point, that's really all that matters on his side of the table because it's all he's got.
And he wants to sort of just pass this turn to prevent Tannon from making any sort of move inside of combat. Because with the Polukranos up on D with all that mana, Tannon can't make a move. So he'll probably pass. I would imagine in the second main phase, Robert will make whatever move he's planning on making here.
And we can't forget with Whisperwood Elemental, it's face-up non-token creatures, so can pick off the Satyr if he has enough mana.
Yeah, it's actually, I think if I was Tannon, I probably would have just plus the Xenagos, because Robert's almost certainly using Polukranos this turn, and the Satyr token is something free for him to pick off, because the only bottleneck on Robert going crazy on Tannon's board right now is the threat of Tannon sacrificing the Whisperwood Elemental. So the tokens are free for him to kill.
Yeah.
Because Whisperwood Elemental does not replace token creatures.
So Bernie can generate a whole bunch of mana here. Nykthos is 7 green. So he actually has 17 green right now. Voyaging Satyr, again, will be -2 with each activation. So you go 7 minus 2 is 5, plus 7 is 12, minus 2 is 5, it's 10, plus 7 is 17. So a lot of mana here.
Which allows him to distribute 8 points of fight across.
Correct.
Which could be, for example, Whisperwood Elemental, the token, and the morph, which has a lot to dodge the impact of Whisperwood Elemental's sack tree.
It looks like he's going to go with Whisperwood Elemental and Courser of Crufix. Get those off the table. Tannon uses the Whisperwood Elemental. Now the Elvish Mystic is turned face down. We won't see the top card of the deck, of course, because Courser of Crufix is no longer in play. Berni draws a mountain. The top card of his deck is an Island of Blossoms. So he's got a pretty good draw coming next turn. And he's got the board pretty well gummed up. Doesn't know what's on top of Grace's deck. Nobody does at this point. But Berni's got an idea of, okay, you got a bunch of creatures out there. I know what the manifest cards are. Xenagos 2/2s aren't really all that scary. I hope you don't draw a great one. But he did. A copy of Crater's Claws. At least an interesting one.
Yeah, this is a kind of a curious sequence there from Robert from the last turn. Once in the draw step, he knew that Tannon was going to draw a forest, so that there's a forest on top. That increases the incentive to get rid of the Courser inside the draw step. And with the Elvish Mystic on top of the deck, that actually kind of increases the incentive to not do anything about the Whisperwood Elemental that turn, because the card that was getting manifested over was low impact. Tannon basically got to clear the Mystic as a draw and the forest as a draw, and got him 2 draw steps closer to this Crater's Claws, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, this Crater's Claws isn't lethal at this point. We know that. Berni's at 23, so the question is, what's the best that Tannon can do with the Crater's Claws? And right now, he's just going to pass the turn back.
And keep in mind, I mean, Tannon can generate a lot of mana with Xenagos.
Yeah. Voyaging Satyr is the draw off of Eidolon of Blossoms. Excuse me, Sylvan Caryatid is. Voyaging Satyr's on top of the deck. We see that from Courser of Crufix. Elvish Mystic's going to be unmorphed. Between Nykthos and Xenagos, yeah, Tannon can make a lot of mana. I think he's about to. He's got a Voyaging Satyr in play too. 5 green here. I don't think this is a 23-point fireball.
This maybe has the Genesis Hydra stink on it, is my guess.
Ugh, smells bad.
Smells rough.
Just 16.
All right, no big deal.
I'll probably miss.
I don't even know if that's possible anymore.
Whisperwood is 1. Pelucranos is another good one. Well, those are the best of the bunch. And it seems like Pelucranos is the best card there.
Yep. And this is setting up Tannon for a very lethal Crater's Claws next turn. As his devotion count has gone up by 4. There's now 2 more creatures in play to pair with the Xenagos.
Not to mention all the nonsense you can do with Pelucranos and fighting.
Right, Robert might not even be able to beat the Pelucranos at this point, but Tannon may not even have to bother with that.
Yeah. And I would be surprised if he could, honestly. You see the top card of his deck is a Voyaging Satyr, so Tannon knows what he's going to draw.
And Tannon's at 19, so there's no alpha strike to be made on Robert's side of the table. He barely has any power in play for all the creatures he has.
Grace will pass the turn back. Berni will draw that Voyaging Satyr. Top card of the deck is a Whisperwood Elemental. Satyr will be deployed. We're heading back Grace's way. Grace will draw a card. Another copy of Pelucranos. It's time to rearrange some mana and see, all right, how much can I generate? And that's exactly what he's doing right now.
It's a lot.
9 green in play for devotion purposes.
And 9 creatures in play for the purposes of Xenagos.
Well, that's 18. That doesn't even work Voyaging Satyr into things.
Or the mana creatures. I mean, this is, this is going to be, Tannon's doing the math right now, and it's going to end up being something like 43 points of damage. It's not going to be close.
Have you counted the Ferocious for Crater's Claws?
That's how I got to 43.
Okay,
from 41.
Yeah, don't forget the +2, my friend.
I call this overrun math, where you're doing the math, you can't quite figure out, you just cast overrun, and then it ends up being lethal by 11 points of damage.
Yeah.
It comes up a lot in limited.
Like, look, I'm pretty sure you're dead. Look at this fireball and extension of the hand. Tannon Grace is going to win this match over Robert Berni, 2-0. The green-red devotion mirror goes to Grace. And for him, he moves on to 9-1 with what looks to be a rather powerful deck.
Well, I mean, right now we're looking at, Robert at X and 2, one of his losses basically coming in the mirror, and Tannon at X and 1. Very impressive for this deck so far. Not